Welcome to the First Party Pod. We're your hosts, Gloria
and Rio.
In this episode, we have another guest. We have Scott Messer joining us, who's the founder of Messer Media. Welcome, Scott.
Hello. Thank you, Gloria and Rio. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so Scott, I've seen that you've described yourself as a sell-side advocate. I think was it ad therapist? I can't remember.
Ad tech therapist.
Tech therapist, even better.
The best kind of therapist.
Exactly. That's what we all need. Can you explain a little bit maybe about yourself and what those mean?
Sure, I'd be happy to. A short story of mine is that I've been on the sell side for over 20 years, publishers for the last 15. I was at a company called Leaf Group or Demand Media for 15 years or 10 years. And then in October of 2022, I left and became an independent consultant, starting my own firm. And I love working on my projects, other people's projects, in different parts of it. And as I was going through that process, I realized that solving the technology problems were only a part of the equation. It's probably 60% of what we actually work on. But if we want these solutions that we're installing through your program or fixing through your company and teams to really stick, you also have to look at the people part of it. So whether we're rehabilitating your ad server or diagnosing your PMPs, it's also important to look at the team aspect. All of that together is what we really call ad tech therapy, where the tears are real, the healing is great, and it's just as much technology as it is people. So I take a lot of pride and joy in that part of the angle. And I don't know, ad tech therapy sounds like a lot of fun.
Love it. So as a sell-side expert, Scott, one thing we did want to talk to you about and talk to the listeners about today was sell-side decisioning. And I really describe this, I guess, as the process by which pubs and the partners they're working with help make those real-time decisions on which ads to show when looking at inventory. And in this model, which is really supply, the pubs, they're making the choices about what to prioritize, not just blindly accepting the highest bids. Knowing you're an expert in this area, first off, love it if you could explain to the listeners, what is this? How do you define it? Do you agree with that definition? Many people are calling this kind of curation 2.0, which we plan to get into a bit as well. Wondering if you could help define this, explain what it means to the industry and the impact both on SSPs and DSPs.
Sell-side decisioning is the technology that an SSP does to enable curation. And it really happens within like the first 10 milliseconds of when an SSP receives a bid request. It is all of the work that an SSP does to attach a deal ID to a bid request. So if you really think about what a SSP is doing, is it's placing an adapter on the publisher's page. It's generating the bid request, bringing the bid request into the sell side, and then it is passing that along to the DSP. When it moves from sort of through the SSP has a bunch of things that it needs to attach to that bid request, one of them being deal IDs. And that could be set up by the publisher, it could be set up by a curator, it could be set up by the SSP themselves for what we might call like the legacy demand generation deals. And then there's fraud reporting and scoring and all those other pieces that sort of have to go with it. And all of that happens at the very beginning of when a bid request comes in. And that is sell-side decisioning, because the decision of what should happen with that impression is being made at that moment. There's a nuance there of, well, who is making that decision? And that's a great question, because is it the SSP making that decision? Is it the DSP making that decision? Is it an algorithm that's installed in the SSP making that decision? This is the new area that's really emerging that's facilitating curation.
That's really interesting. So sell-side decisioning is not a super new concept, right? And we've seen it discussed as a way to give publishers more control and improve monetization. And however, this topic really seems to be dominating more and more conversations these days. So why do you think that sell-side decisioning has really become more popular recently? Is it privacy? Is it cookies? Is it transparency, new, better technology? What do you think?
It's a confluence of all of those factors, I would say. I think that one is that the SSPs were staring down their own future of becoming irrelevant. When you look at Andrew Casale, the CEO of Index Exchange's words, and he talks about now he's willing to admit that the SSPs are a commodity or more like a community service, that they are really these super pipes that everything runs through. They realize that they have this ability to do sell-side decisioning. And there's some reasons that we can talk about of like how that shifts, the SSP responsibilities. But when you're talking about losing signal through cookie deprecation, moving closer to the supply path is more important for collecting signal. When you're looking at being a technology vendor that wants to be a part of the bid request or the decision process, waiting for the DSP integration queues can sometimes be a prohibitively and debilitatingly long time. But the SSP integrations are actually quite fast because they have a different integration method, and I think it's a much bigger deal for a DSP to make these integrations, whereas the SSP is just really facilitating and enabling technology that helps liquidate inventory. So it's in their best interest to adopt as many of these models or algorithms or systems that help them liquidate inventory. Whereas a DSP is not really incentivized in that same way. And a DSP is kind of like it's up to them to build the secret sauce of how they buy impressions and decision on impressions. So if you think about if you were somebody who was trying to liquidate inventory through data and packaging, would you rather if you were a technology vendor who was implementing your technology, would you rather move into the supply side where the integration times are short and easy, or into the DSPs where they're resistant in every way because your solution is actually competitive to their own solution?
So we were talking, you had brought up tech, Scott, and you brought up a couple companies. So I thought it might be nice to talk to listeners about a couple tech firms that are, at least in my opinion, I think, and getting there's a lot of discussion in the industry about them, about the excellent work they're doing, both on buy and sell sides of the equation. Chalice, Custom Algorithms, Chalice AI, and Index Exchange. You mentioned them as well. And I've always looked at Chalice as like they're making custom AI software and machine learning that integrates. I thought it was with DSPs, but I mean, you probably know better than I do. And Index Exchange obviously is an SSP. Wondering if you could tell us a little bit about these two companies, what they're doing, especially as it relates to supply side, that you think will be interesting and relevant to the conversation.
Sure. So I'm not an expert in Chalice, but I'll speak on them. What they're doing is they're bringing a decisioning algorithm about what impressions you should be buying based on a variety of KPIs, inputs, and signals that it has access to. And that is really the decision engine of a DSP. So that algorithm is what buyers are investing in. And then you can do all of that decisioning within the supply layer, and it essentially shoots back deal IDs out to an actual DSP. And then that DSP would just buy the impressions that are signaled within the deal ID. This is what is known as moving the decision engine from the demand side to the supply side. If you think about the effects that come out from that, what's the role of a DSP if the decisions are being made in the supply side?
Is it a dumb pipe?
It becomes a transactional pipe.
Okay.
It
I,
would still have value, but it becomes a dumb pipe. And SSPs then become the smart pipe. But if you think about it back from that, community service aspect, they just want to be the highways and the tollways that facilitate it. They don't need to be the transaction layer, which is why I think you see SSPs really being willing to work with these other decision engines so that you can move that into the supply layer.
so SSPs are happy with, let's say, working with a third party, but DSPs, same or not?
From an integration standpoint, historically, we've seen them be not as interested in that. From a what is curation doing to DSPs angle, I don't think we've seen the full blowback from this yet, but if you're a DSP, you're probably having a very existential conversation with yourself about your purpose and how you're going to secure your clients and whether you're going to become a smart pipe or a dumb pipe. There's a lot of people who say that the power is still with the buy side, and that's still true. But it doesn't mean that you have to make your decisions only in a DSP or that you have to pay exorbitant fees to a DSP to handle all of that decision making. As you provide more options for the marketplace for where they can do their decisions, you're also going to see margin compression. And that we know is bad for DSPs.
So in that future, DSPs kind of become a community service the way SSPs have it, if they just become more the pipes, right? If decisioning sitting elsewhere. That's interesting.
Not in the same way. I think that DSP is then it's your tool. It's a tool for accessing the highways, right? I think
Well, there's also the role of creative as well, and that's where you find your audiences. So they do a lot of other things. To your point.
Yeah, and there's verification, transactions, reporting, attribution, and measurement. A lot of that stuff can still happen in the DSP, which is it's really just that decision engine. But I think if you looked at a lot of the DSP fees, the majority of them are baked into inventory scoring, quality, audience data, and sort of pre-decision elements or decision elements.
Kind of makes sense why a lot of them are getting into planning now too, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
And I mean, Rio, maybe you know this better than I do, but what happened to media planning as part of agency budgets when programmatic came about? Did it disappear? Did it go to the trade desk? Did they lose media planning?
I think to a certain extent. I mean, what I saw a lot of places was like planning kind of, it was just the brands assumed, okay, well, you're going to, we want to see your plan in order to give you the business.
100%.
And then we'll go with you. And then it just kind of like, it's assumed you do it and you're going to take it at, whatever your agency fee is, that covers it. So I think planning was devalued to a certain extent, with the switch to programmatic sale. That'd be my take.
And now with curation, it's sort of, I see it as a little bit of a lever that agencies may have to offer curation services in a way to reclaim planning from DSPs. Certainly programmatic planning. You have to imagine that there will be agency curation desks.
All has to happen.
There are some already. But what's to stop them from doing that?
Any agency that's not getting, any media agency is not getting into curation and setting up a curation desk, or at least a team that is really good at that and they're making that a core part of their offering, is going to be in trouble. Be my guess.
It's super smart. I mean, think about, and if you look at like the Epsilon purchase and the InfoSum purchase, using these identity signals closer together and then being able to activate them through the supply side, essentially you can neuter the margin of DSPs from the agency perspective and do all of that work for your clients without interrupting the DSP relationship. They can still transact through the DSP. And an agency, they already lost the trading desk wars. Remember agency trading desks? When was the last time that I heard those two words? They can reclaim a bunch of that. And it's good for publishers too.
But it's funny, Lester said the other day, you brought up WPP, that what did he say? Like, no human hands will touch media planning in 5 years. I mean, that's a bold statement, right?
I believe it, for sure.
I mean, it's going to be heavily AI driven, but I think there'll be humans reviewing and approving it.
I think until the point where we trust it, it's just going to be continuously getting better, and then a human just doesn't even want to look at it and just says, "I know it's going to be good."
It's interesting.
Do you think the chief investment officers believe that for like the media investment
on brand side?
That means they're out of the job too.
Yeah, I don't know. That's I'd be worried. Never underestimate. Number one, I think how humans can be a bottleneck. to change. Even if tech
Oh,
can do things like, if humans are in the way, that'll be the way that'll be the number one impediment for adoption, number one. But I think also never underestimate incentive. If people are incented not to use things, they won't. So I
yeah.
think a lot of it comes down to that. Show me the incentives, let's show you the behavior. That's a famous quote by Charles Munger. So I guess moving along, I think, Gloria, you wanted to talk about curation a little bit, right?
Of course. That's what we talk about curation a lot on this podcast, and I love it because, again, it was a buzzword last year, and now I feel like we just continuously are bringing it up. And I think, well, there's a notion of, we talked about curation 1.0 and 2.0, and when we spoke to Joe from Permutive on our last episode, he mentioned that Curation 1.0 was predominantly built on third-party IDs and cookies, and that was a bit of an arbitrage game. And that ad networks tended to exploit that. He posited that Curation 2.0 could be solved with publishers taking a more active role, powering ad curation with their own first-party data sets, and that agencies becoming their own curators, building their own packages, would reduce untrustworthy data and dodgy inventory. So, Scott, do you think one or the other will survive, or do you think in the future, will both live in tandem? I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Curation 1.0, Curation 2.0, and the future Curation 3.0 will all live and exist in the future.
Nice.
It's about incentives, and it's about sales teams. I commented on somebody's post a while back, like, it works because it sells. It doesn't work because it's proving something. It works because they were able to sell it and run money through the program. All of these tactics are kind of necessary in the future. It really depends what you're trying to do. But Curation 2.0, where I think some people are getting closer to the signals, is the way forward. But I think that who is getting closer to the signal and how well you can trust the signal is going to be the next big debate that happens. In the Jounce Media report from Chris Kane for April, they talk about one of the elements is a lack of transparency for the buy side through curation deals. It's a black box, in essence. You can't see the decisioning engine, but remind you can't see the decisioning engine inside a DSP either.
Hmm.
But you have your agents who can be in the DSP and can look at the line items and the settings. But inside curation, you have to trust somebody else for whether they're bringing you organic materials and unprocessed foods and whatever they may have promised you. You don't know if that's actually happening or not. So for a DSP, they can be providing verification that some of the curation inventory that surfaced matches whatever you were promised. But I think we're going to see a little bit of a flight to quality on the data side. But it's still, if it sells products or if it sells campaigns, they're going to continue to use those tactics. So we haven't eradicated the problems of Curation 1.0, but at least we've given a better path that allows for some transparency and people to be able to audit the signal and use more of the signal, especially those provided directly by the publisher.
That's interesting. Okay, so both in tandem for a little bit. I'm curious to hear what 3.0 will look like, but what technologies do you think are enabling this rise of Curation 2.0? Are we talking about SSP level innovations or clean room, first party IDs, something else?
At a basic level, Curation 2.0 is facilitated by basic SSP technology being supercharged through their curation platforms. Xandr Curate really started it. Index Marketplaces was a fast follow. And I've recently learned that just about every SSP has a curation platform or has cobbled something together that works like it. How people bring data and signal into an SSP and then activate it through the supply layer is an important part of this aspect. This is where the concept of super signal aggregators come in. And if you think about, well, how how do you get data into an SSP if it's not captured in the bid request? Well, it's some basic stuff. Cookie syncs, if you can find it, CSV match tables uploaded in bulk, and potentially server-side ID matching or, one-to-one helms. None of that stuff is new. It's old stuff. So there's an interesting, I don't know, cliffhanger of chapter 2 somewhere. What happens when it gets harder to get data into the SSP? If IDs go away, if you can no longer do cookie syncs or can no longer do match table uploads.
A big part of this kind of curation, let's say 2.0, would be having pubs use their data and signals for monetization. And, one way to do it is through seller-defined audiences. And that would be, I would say, both for curated deals as well as for programmatic. And I think we're seeing a trend there. I'm wondering, it's a topic I'm hearing more and more. What can you tell us about them and the role you see for them moving forward?
For seller-defined audiences, or which part?
Seller-defined audiences.
This is a great idea executed very poorly. First, the branding of seller-defined audiences was fraught from the beginning. It shouldn't have been named that because buyers inherently think that that's bad. Using SDA, seller-defined audiences, as a vehicle for communicating information, I think is okay. I think buyers still want verified data by some third-party source. This is where product marketing comes in.
So a lot of it comes down to trust or lack of trust.
Exactly. Everybody is repackaging the same information. It's a publisher's webpage, and there are words on the page, and an NLP goes and ingests it and spits out entities and elements of the page, and then those get packaged into segments. And of course, we know that some of that was just done at the URL level, and that is not a great way to categorize what's in a page. I think that has been fraught with peril from everyone from brand verification vendors to contextual providers. So everyone's like repackaging the same thing. I think data scrapers have taken those from publishers and unfortunately were able to productize it better than individual publishers could. And then you can get a lot of it from the bid stream these days. And publishers have largely resigned to pushing a bunch of their contextual data into the stream because you can't put that toothpaste back into the tube. It's largely already out there. So I don't think it's really seller-defined audiences that moves this needle, but I think a lot of the ID-based resolution is going to be important for advertisers to work more closely with publishers or curators to work more closely with publishers. Like if you want your probabilistic ID or deterministic ID to be used by a publisher that will help facilitate the signal that you can sense, package, and distribute, you need to be code on page with a publisher.
So you think it'll be a combination of signals, let's say contextual plus deterministic and probabilistic audience signals ultimately?
And you have to ask, like, how do you get a probabilistic signal out of a publisher's webpage? And you have to have code on page somewhere. It could be in the pre-bid layer, and we've seen a lot of identity vendors just activate through pre-bid. But if you want the best signal, you actually have a piece of code, the JavaScript, on every publisher's page, on the publisher's pages. I think you've seen Audigent do that with the Hadron ID, and that's a huge component of the backbone of their curation and a big aspect for Experian. That's one of the effects I think you're going to see is that curators are going to need to strike special partnerships with publishers. And whether that's the super signal aggregator as the curator or a curation house that wants to develop their own signal, or even to get access to better inventory. This, I think, is the next sort of revolution inside curation that I hope to see.
Like a trust but verify model, right?
Mm-hmm. If curation has the effect of concentrating demand through fewer pipes because it's done on deal IDs through specific SSPs and through specific curator hands, the reliance on the smaller SSPs will decrease. if you start bunching up your demand from being 5% and 10% in your tier 1 SSPs besides Google AdX, and that becomes 15 and 20%, now all of a sudden these SSPs that are scrounging together 1, 2, 3% become less important to you. And publishers may start doing what we call demand path optimization, which is systematically removing SSPs from your pipes so that you can better facilitate direct demand. That would also include making DSP direct connections, like OpenPath.
Yeah, I think I like that.
Yeah, we talked about deal IDs a little bit at the beginning of the episode. We used to think of deal IDs as something that's like boutique and high end and very specific, but now it seems like deal IDs are just everywhere and that most DSPs are routing the majority of their traffic through them. So I don't think publishers are making much money off of them, so why aren't they making more? And what needs to happen for deal IDs to become a value maximizing tool for both sides? So not just a control mechanism for the buy side, but also for the sell side.
Let me pull up this stat for you directly so that I get it correct. But in that same report that I talked about from the Chris Kane Jounce report in April, actually 81% of open auction bid requests have at least one deal ID attached to it.
What do you think that was 5 years ago?
75%.
Okay.
A lot of that comes from legacy demand generation deals. And that's where Index, Pomatic, Magnite would say like, hey, we're going to take all of our finance sections and put them together in one big super pipe. And we'll just make that available, and our demand teams will tell the buyers that we have finance content or cooking content. And that was a very early rudimentary form of curation, and there were no fees associated with that. That was part of what you paid an SSP to do. And when I say that it's 75%, there's a really weird thing of how MCM networks work, how sort of some roll-ups work, and also SSP duplication. But generally, I think that a lot of inventory had deal IDs on it. I don't think, though, any publisher would guess that only 19% of all bid requests have no deal IDs on them.
I wouldn't have guessed that.
Yeah.
That's much higher than I thought.
And the even crazier number that really came out of that is that of that 81%, only 9% of those were single seller IDs. Which means that a deal ID only had one seller, like Condé Nast or ESPN.com inside of it. Or those aren't even great examples. But one seller, one publisher, as opposed to what a curator would make is one deal ID that has multiple sellers inside of it.
Mm.
So when Chris Kane sees a deal ID that has a single seller ID, typically we would believe that was created by a publisher or by the seller themselves, because why would they, one, why would they make a deal that included other sellers? And two, they actually can't do that. That's just, you're limited to what's in your account to package. So the rest of those multi-seller deals are by definition from curators, whether it was early SSP curation or more of the recent index marketplace, Xandr Curate, and other type of company curation.
Okay.
So deal IDs do make publishers more money.
Okay.
The problem is it conflicting or competing against their own sales efforts?
Interesting.
That's the rub of curation for pubs, is like, yes, this is probably making me more money and it's helping, somebody is bringing me liquidity to my inventory, but is it undermining the effort of my direct sales team?
And as direct sales is where they're seeing the most growth. I mean, most pubs we talk to in terms of number of deals.
SSPs are certainly seeing growth in this. Publishers are seeing anywhere from low single digits to low teens of SSP curation demand, I would say, which is why, Gloria, when you asked what the increase or what it was 5 years ago, I don't think it's that big. I don't think curation 2.0 is enormous yet.
Mm-hmm.
And remember, these are bid requests that we're talking about. It's not actual dollars. I think the majority of dollars might be flowing through publisher sold deal IDs single seller deal IDs. And I'd be very curious to see how the money is distributed through those other multi-seller deals. There's, I think, over 5% of bid requests have more than 20 deal IDs attached to it. That means theoretically, you have 20 people in your lobby asking you to purchase that impression through their deal ID.
Yeah, it's just
That could
wild.
be
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
per
look.
it's per SSP, per company, per publisher. And think about if you're a DSP, how do you look at a bid request that has like 20 deal IDs in it and decide which one to pick?
Sure.
Well, first you have to enable it as part of the campaign, but how old are those deal IDs? 10 years old? Some of these were built in 2014, 2015, and you just don't take them off the shelf.
That's wild. I mean,
The IAB Tech Lab, Trade Desk, there is a lot of work being done right now on deal ID transparency. And I think you're going to probably see Trade Desk blow up using deal IDs. They've already waged war on them a long time ago, which is another one. Like, why would the Trade Desk need deal IDs?
looking at number of deal IDs, number of bids, pubs working with many different SSPs. I mean, bid duplication, obviously, I'd argue is kind of a mess. And that's why I think there's been a lot of talk about supply path optimization, or SPO. I think I was read, and there was that report last year that 84% of bids are duplicate, which is just crazy. And for those who are not, I guess, really deep in ad tech or kind of ad tech nerds, like bid duplication is when the SSP sends multiple requests for the same ad impression, and it's super wasteful. To your point, I don't think it really adds anything or benefits anyone. You mentioned the other day that SPO had maybe peaked. I mean, wonder if you could comment on it, the role of it. Why does it happen? What could be done about it? Should we worry about it, et cetera?
These are iterations. So SPO, I think we're in like SPO 2.0, really the Jounce era of SPO. I think they've gotten to a point where further SPO significantly diminishes the returns, certainly for publishers, and advertisers are still buying this stuff. Feed DSPs what they eat is one of my favorite sayings in ad tech, again from Jounce Media. But if DSPs are eating it, why should we stop feeding it to them? And why are DSPs still eating reseller impressions, cheap reach impressions, and other things that are generally considered not nutritious? I think we've seen the end of where this version of SPO gets us to.
Is that more supply
But
path transparency than optimization? Should that be the goal?
I think all the transparency is there. I think they know what it is. They just can't stop themselves from buying it because DSPs are programmed to seek out cheap inventory and to optimize for KPIs. And when you do that, the system will eat non-nutritious things. So to push SPO further, I think curation can help with that, cleaning up supply paths. We talked a lot about how moving into a deal ID system can start, and the curator system can start concentrating demand through fewer pipes. And then you're going to see publishers pulling up the ladders to the other SSPs that can't drive unique demand, can't drive incremental, don't have any curation demand, and are really just open auction bottom feeders. It's already 19. If all they're doing is really yielding you the open auction, that's only 19% of all bid requests. If you're an SSP that's not doing curation or enabling it or helping bring algorithms in that liquidate inventory, you've got a short window to turn yourself around. And then that's where publishers start pulling them up and supply paths get cleaner because publishers do it. So the next wave of SPO is DPO, demand path optimization.
That's going to be fun.
Another acronym.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, there's so many. I can't keep up. But okay, so we've gone through almost half this episode without talking about AI, so I have to bring in
You got to do it.
physics. I know. So with supply path optimization, do you think AI could enmesh itself into that as well? Could that be a SPO 2.0?
I think it does, but I wouldn't say that like AI does better SPO. It's not like we're going to supercharge your your supply path transparency things. I'm sure people can run it through the models. That's machine learning.
Mhm.
Where I think you see AI play a role here is going back to sell-side decisioning and installing algorithms into the SSPs. That algorithm could easily be an AI agent.
Right.
Somebody saying, this is the audiences that I'm looking for, these are the campaigns that I'm optimizing for, these are the KPIs that I want to optimize for. And then your agent or your algorithm is doing that work for you. That's where I think you see AI really inserting itself to clean up the supply path. And that's how you see sort of curation and AI fusing themselves together to forever alter the media decisioning power dynamic between sellers and buyers.
So you unleash an army of AI agents on the supply layer, cleans up the supply path, in theory, boosts yield for publishers, better experience for consumers too. I mean, should DSPs be worried? Because is this why like Trade Desk is with OpenPath is going, let's say, straight to supply? Well, how can you comment on that?
Yes, they should be worried. Whether it actually plays out this way is yet to be seen. And yes, that's why I think that's where I think Trade Desk uses OpenPath, because they can put their decisioning engine in the supply layer. And that's, I posted on LinkedIn earlier this week that my daily ponder was like, should DSPs move into SSPs and move their decisioning engine in it? Because essentially, if the DSP has a decisioning algorithm or agent, it could deploy that at the supply layer and create deal IDs for itself. I think you'd offload a bunch of costs. You could create more transparency. You'd get closer to signal. You could probably do more things and get more access. And then your DSP, you take all of that out of your AWS bill, all that decisioning, which is probably a huge load of compute, and let the SSPs pay for it. And then they've just made themselves dumb pipes.
Everyone's happy with AWS.
Yeah.
in that example.
And they're big bills. That's like what percentage of these companies' bills is just data costs?
A lot. Yeah, for some startups, it's up to 40%.
Ours are pretty high.
Andrew Casale, his prediction at the AdTech Economic Forum was there's going to be fewer SSPs in the future and more DSPs.
Do you agree?
But I think inside of that is there's more agents working in the SSP layer to facilitate more DSPs. Because a DSP is just swipe a credit card and buy some impressions that have been decided for you somewhere else.
Yeah, the less they do, actually, the lower the barrier to entry. Looking at identity, it'd be nice to talk about it maybe a little bit. There's the news recently, the InfoSum deal with WPP, which really gives. I heard it described as a data bunker. I don't know if that's a good description, but obviously Publicis with Epsilon and Lotame, and then we had Omnicom and IPG going together, and gives them access in theory to all the Axiom signals. Identity still plays a big role. Love if you could maybe talk about it a little bit. Like, where do you see things going? Joe, who was on last week, was talking about the shift, really what he felt away from deterministic to more probabilistic audiences in the future and signals. So just love your comment on that, and specifically for supply side, the role of identity.
Joe Root is very smart. I'll tell you that.
No disagreement.
Yeah.
Probabilistic IDs is a really interesting component of liquidating inventory. You don't need a relationship with the user. It works pretty well for identifying them, but it's not exactly one-to-one. But it's close enough for most people. Bid enrichment uses that same principle in order to help create liquidity in Safari or cookieless inventory. If probabilistic identifiers is enough to facilitate inventory liquidation, it's also enough to do clean room analysis. I think by definition, a probabilistic identifier might introduce enough noise into the signal that it is privacy enhancing on its own. But from a clean room perspective, why aren't more buyers and sellers doing clean rooms on a probabilistic basis?
Joe was arguing that's the future.
Yeah.
I think it has to be.
Yeah.
I mean, I would argue that buyers don't have enough of their own deterministic identity to replace the loss of cookies. They're not one for one. They were different media tactics from the very beginning. Buyers doing how many email addresses do we think like the largest marketers have? Or really the middle set of marketers have? They don't have that many. 1 million, 2 million, 5 million? That's a small budget amount. So I think we haven't seen yet the spend come through the identity layer yet because buyers don't have it.
It's
There's
interesting.
many campaigns.
Yeah, I think Omnicom, IPG, they were saying at their own 2 billion identities apparently, but which would be a lot. But then it's interesting, like you mentioned conversations on LinkedIn. We had a good one last week. I think someone, I forget who it was saying how he was running tests with deterministic signals from, I don't know which holdco. And I think he was saying it was anywhere from a 3 to 20% match rate at best. So
Wow.
pretty low, right? And
So low.
and then I commented that I had seen with, the best matches I had seen was from retail media data where we're getting, sometimes 80, even 85% after you massage things a little bit. But let's say the floor would be maybe around 60 when you start doing those. But those are low match rates.
So, I mean, match rate is one part of it, but it's like how many identifiers did that person have to start with? How many impressions would it generate inside of a campaign, which dictates how big is that campaign from a dollar perspective? If you were to slice up a marketer's average ad spend and you look at deterministic one-to-one targeting versus audience-based targeting and contextual-based targeting versus like broad reach, front of newspaper stuff, how much of that budget is really a deterministic ad spend against their known user list?
Probably not a lot.
5%?
Yeah.
Not more than 20%? Right? And if it is more than 20%, it's a very specialized program or company.
Yeah.
So, deterministic ideas may be around for a while. I think the California Department of Justice is going to have something to say to that about UID and Trade Desk's use of them. And that will be an interesting story to watch.
California always has things to say,
Yes,
don't they?
yes.
Kind of a harbinger for a lot of these things. So I know we're getting close to the end here, but I did want to maybe, before we wrap up here, just talk about, I mean, generally speaking, Scott, I mean, I don't know anyone with the deep knowledge you have on supply side. Love what you've been able to talk to us about. I really like your point of view, though, I guess just more generally. The last 25 years, really, since I've been working in media, it just has not been great for pubs, especially for news publishers. First, Craigslist came along, and I think back when I started, when I started working in media, around 35-40% of the newspaper business was classified ads. Craigslist wiped that out, completely disrupted that. Then Google and Facebook came along, and you could argue siphoned billions of dollars off from major publishers. I mean, there was that one famous study saying they owed the industry $14 billion annually. I mean, there were people debating that if that's legit or not. And then looking at cookie loss, whether it's from privacy laws or platform level changes, whether it's ATT, which may or may not be around, GDPR, CCPA, et cetera. I think that, as we've seen, traffic without IDs, they monetize maybe up to 40% lower for pubs. And then looking at AI, I mean, that's just like one nail in the coffin after the other, right? AI, is it, I mean, I read one study, it was saying I think Forbes published it, it was beating down referral traffic by 96%,
Oh, wow.
which is wild. So all the traffic's going to disappear. It's a pretty gloomy picture, yet I do talk to people in the industry will say that they feel like it's time for with curation 2.0, with some of the things we talked about today, Scott, that this is the time for pubs. Are they going to take the power back? Is this the year of pub tech? Love to hear your comments on that, and what do you see happening, let's say next 12 to 18 months?
Publisher ad tech and publisher traffic, independent topics, although interrelated when you look at total revenue. I think pub tech will make a comeback, and the balance of power is going to shift back to the supply side, in that they're going to be play a major role in this. I think buyers will always control the decisions, so to speak, because they have the purse strings, but publishers will become more important from that aspect. So that might be protecting the CPMs. But you always ask me what my biggest worry is in publishing, and it's traffic. As a SEO publisher for a decade, trust me, I worry about traffic. And this is the hard part that publishers are grappling with right now in the industry is will they have page views left to monetize in the future? I always say, if you give me page views, I will give you CPMs, but if you give me no page views, we probably don't have a business. So how will consumers access that information in the future? If it's all through LLMs, does a website need to exist anymore? Not really. But how does that information get to the internet? Where does it go? How does it come out? If newspapers disappear, there is no local reporting that shows up in the LLMs. Should the LLMs hire writers directly and just have them input facts into some sort of Google questionnaire and then submit those into the LLM? Maybe. This is a format change. Information isn't going away. The thirst for knowledge is not going away, but format is changing. We saw this from print to digital, radio, television, film, streaming. All of these have gone through it. But I don't know if publishers know how this is going to end. And the beloved format of the internet may look very different in 5 years if we start putting more of these publishers out of business.
Yeah, well, you need content to train the LLMs, right? I mean, like, what are they going to be trained on if all the news publishers disappear? I think that's a good question.
And the internet might look like everyday America Main Street after the big box stores rolled through their towns. It's just empty and abandoned and nothing going on inside of them. That's not a very fun place. I don't have a good solution for it. My recommendation to publishers is innovate. And it's content format innovation. You have to do something that the LLMs can't provide for a user. And that's a hard thing to invent and ideate. But I don't think we've seen an investment in content innovation in the last 10 years, maybe. BuzzFeed, Quartz, those were things that like really changed the models. And they both have sort of gone by the wayside, but publishers need to reinvent themselves. They need to change their business models, their traffic models, everything. Otherwise, they will become obsolete.
That's a very interesting perspective, and I'm excited to see all the innovation.
Yeah, well, almost being forced to innovate. Well,
Yeah.
what is it? Necessity is the mother of invention. So maybe now we'll see some of those things. I mean, I think the problem though is a lot of these pubs. I mean, they've had so many disastrous years. I mean, it takes money to innovate. Are these businesses people want to invest in? I mean, you look at all the money going into AI. So maybe that's solutions guy. Maybe AI companies buy the news publishers, let them. Because there needs to be something to keep them going, and then maybe I don't know whether content's gated and they sell or syndicate the content to the LLMs, or maybe there's two internets. There's the the main street that people see, and there's the version that LLM scrape. I don't know.
Right.
It's quite a cliffhanger.
Yeah.
We're all waiting to find out.
So before we wrap, is there anything that we didn't cover today that you'd like to bring up as the ad tech therapist?
I would say, continue investing in your teams, educate people, train them. They will be our future leaders. If we do not have future leaders in this business, we will not have a business. So continue supporting people and pay attention to your businesses. They need help, always.
Scott, great seeing you. As always, a pleasure. I'm sure I'll run into you again, whether it's maybe at Upfronts or Cannes or something like that. But I love having you on here.
Yeah, thank you so much. You were amazing.
Gloria, Rio, it was really a pleasure. Thank you for letting me stop by today, and always happy to share my thoughts with you. I'll see you at the conferences.
Love it.
All right, see ya.
Bye.